And we're live. Welcome everybody to the first Open RFC call of 2021. Happy New Year, and hopefully some folks on the call were able to have a bit of a rest. Appreciate you joining us again for an Open RFC, NPM Open RFC call. We have a really small agenda today. There's only 2 issues that were flagged in the RFC repo. And just quickly, we can do maybe a round of introductions for some new folks that are on the call. I guess Michael or Gar, would you like to introduce yourself and sort of what you're doing now?
Hi, I'm Gar. I am joining the CLI team, so it's day 3, so I don't really know what that means yet. So you all might have a better idea of what I'm going to be doing than I will. But that's me and what I'm doing.
Cool. Yeah, we're happy to have Gar working with us full time now. And it looks like, Jonathan, have you joined before? Jonathan Grimes?
No, this is my first time.
Would you like to say hi, let us know what you do, or?
Yeah, hello. I'm Jonathan. I'm not really working at NPM. I just was invited to join the call. I'm the one who raised the issue about the workspace that we're going to be talking about. I work at NextBot in Oklahoma. So hello.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining. Cool. So quickly, as I do normally, just be mindful as we're speaking. There's a code of conduct that we follow in the RFC's repo as well as on these calls. If you want, it should be linked there in the npm/RFC's repo. And just be mindful as folks are talking, please raise your hand if you'd like to say something, and I'll call on you. Again, the sort of intentions of these calls is to work closely with the community and hopefully drive forward initiatives and features that we think are important. Also to, sort of close the loop in feedback and see improvements in the NPM CLI. Quickly, any announcements from folks? If not, we'll dive right in. So the first issue that we had on the agenda was the RFC support to version specifiers other than semver ranges. So number 301, I'll link that for folks. Roy, I can take notes if you'd like to speak to this.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be good.
Did you want to give a bit of a summary?
Cool. Yeah, I can give a summary for sure. And then Jonathan can also speak up to it. He was the one who originally brought this up in the CLI repo as an issue there. And then I brought this over to the RFC so that we can like chat about it, right? And just be sure what is the best way forward here. So basically the issue is, as of today, workspaces only really works if you're using semver range in the package that are consuming that workspace internally. So if you want a workspace to be symlink and use that instead, you kind of are stuck with only semver ranges. And yeah, basically the original issue is that Jonathan wanted to use a Git version specifier instead. So basically just point it to a repo, like install that. And that's kind of like not supported, like we're not even thought this through originally, but I think it's kind of like part of the process, right? So yeah, maybe Jonathan, if you want to add something. I see Jordan just raised his hand, which is nice. I think Zoom just updated their UI.
Yeah, so now. Maybe Jordan, you can jump in and then, or sorry, Jonathan, and then Jordan.
Yeah, Jonathan should go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I have this large project that is checked out into a shape of a monorepo, but all the pieces are still in their own repos. So there is an umbrella project that all the packages are checked out into these workspace directories. And so all of them install fine when you're just installing normally. But if you want to use the workspace, the links happen, but it also creates the checkouts in the subdirectories of each of the projects. So it's like 95% of the way there. And it just doesn't seem to think that the Git versions honor the workspace link versions. And I think that's what it's doing. I'm nowhere near involved in knowing more than that, but yeah, so Jordan?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So Roy, like, I guess the first question is why that restriction in the first place? Like, let's say the package in my mono repo, package foo is version 2, and then in another package in my mono repo, I depend on foo at version 1. Does Workspaces do something there where it's like, oh, well, you want version 1 and the local one's version 2, so I'm not going to link it. I'm going to install that one. So that's the first question. If it's, and I'm not saying it should, I'm just saying, like, does it? So does it actually do anything with the Semver ranges right now?
So,
and then yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually what I wanted to clarify. What it actually does when you have workspaces, it's really pretty simple. Everything that's listed as a workspace is linked up at the top level, right? And then we go through and we resolve all of their dependencies in the normal way. So if you depend on foo at 1 and there's a symlink to a foo at 1 in the root, well, then that dependency is met and we move on. If you depend on foo at 2 and there's a foo at 1 linked in the, the folder above yours, then that dependency is not met. And in fact, we need to nest another one in order to not have a conflict, right? Because we can't have 2 of the same thing in the same place at the same time. What's happening here is now, and that's also like, if you depended on foo at .. /foo, that would also work, because it would say, well, you want a symlink to this folder, and what I have is a symlink to that folder, so you're good. I don't have to touch it. If you depend on a tag, it will look and see that there's a version number on it and say, well, I'm guessing that it was that tag at some point in the past, so I'm going to call that okay. The challenge here is we have a symlink to a folder, and what you depend on is a Git repo. So when we look at, like, what is the node that's in there, what is its resolved value, like what is it? All that we see on that root node is it's a symlink to a folder. And what we're not actually going through and saying, well, is it a Git checkout from, this or that particular location? Now, if we were a little smarter here, and I think we could be, and this is kind of where it gets into RFC territory, what we would need to do is when we have a node, a package node in the root or anywhere that is a symlink, and that symlink has a .git directory in it, we would have to, and then we have a dependency on a Git URL, we would have to look in that .git folder, say, is this a checkout of that thing? And if so, then go ahead and let it be valid, right? Treat it as if it's a valid, satisfying dependency. Another workaround, which has its own set of challenges, like another way that you might approach this is to actually have the root depend on the Git versions of all those things, and then their dependencies would still be fine. But what's going to happen there is you're going to have checkouts in the root node modules folder, and then have to be smart enough to kind of go and do your editing inside of node modules or manually set up symlinks, et cetera. And that's also kind of challenging.
So that's a really helpful explanation. And I think that your kind of implied RFC path there is a good way to meet Jonathan's use case. But I really think that the issue here is that NPM's implementation of workspaces and everyone else's is fundamentally flawed in that all of them use the node modules hierarchy. And that is not how anyone actually wants to use their work, like their monorepo. They never, they actually don't.
We hoist by default.
Yes, I'm saying that hoisting is not what anybody wants, and no hoisting is not what anybody wants. But those are the only two models that are available in the ecosystem right now. What everybody wants is what I've tried to explain on past RFC calls, which is that you want peer depths to be shared, and you want workspace depths to be shared, monorepo depths to be shared, and you never want anything else to be shared, ever. And if you did, you would put it in the package JSON at the top repo and just get that by default without any special workspace features. But the hoisting behavior is actually actively harmful, I think, in that both in that it allows your project to depend on something that it doesn't actually have in its dependencies manifest, which will then break users when you publish it. But also because it actually creates issues like this, where the conflation of node modules folder hierarchies with the actually desired sharing behavior is causing problems for edge cases, like Jonathan's monorepo setup. So
right,
I don't know. I know it's very like bold and potentially unpractical to suggest like let's do a wholly workspaces totally differently. But like the more that I see these edge cases and the more that I interact with workspaces, the more that I'm convinced that just everyone's doing it fundamentally flawed right now, and that we need to come up with something new to do it correctly, or we're just going to be chasing down these edge cases with RFCs forever.
Yeah, so I think that there's something interesting here, like kind of should we treat a symlink to a GET checkout as a valid satisfaction for a GET dependency? And I think there's a pretty strong case to be made there that we should. Workspaces aside, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
If I've checked something out as a submodule and then I depend on that as a symlink, and something else depends on the Git repo URL, and it's at that branch or whatever, that actually should be fine. And
doing that fix does not seem like it will obstruct what I'm talking about either. So like it seems like a fine thing to do in the short term, but like I want to yet again kind of implore us to not put a band-aid on it and then move on to I think we should actually do a deep dive on what like a conceptually correct workspaces implementation would look like, and not be constrained by all of the prior art, which I think has done a good job of trying to solve the majority use cases, but has not actually looked at it holistically and come up with an alternative model.
Right. So I think, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is basically peer depths should always be hoisted.
They should be shared. And I'm saying that because like I think that hoisting automatically gives it to makes it available to all of the workspaces, and that should not be the case. I should be able to say these two packages have a peer dep and these two don't, which means these two can't require it and these two can, and they'll get the same one. I'm saying like we have to invent a new concept that does not involve hoisting of any kind, that installs things in a place that isn't a node modules directory, but that is local to the workspace.
We don't need to. This thing exists. It's called import maps. They've got intent to ship in browsers. I have the issue open for almost a year now on Node. I think we could build a great proof of concept of that. I've actually worked on it before, just never finished it. But I think I fully agree. And I think that we've taken a great step toward this awareness being raised by having it in NPM where it followed the prior art. But I think that fundamentally, these things are all hacks around the fact that we don't have a really good way to deal with it. And if we're comfortable adding hacks that we're going to have to support, that you are going to have to support for 5 years from now, 10 years from now, forever maybe, which might be like this sort of logic around how we resolve Git dependencies. But then we have to look at every single one in that list. And I was kind of reading it, and the original reason I raised my hand was because some of these are going to be ambiguous, and they're going to cause people confusion and problems if you can specify them, where the Semver ranges could be troublesome for some folks, but I think it's pretty easily understood. Whereas like what you just described with the Git, is it a Git repo? Like, is it the right Git repo? Like, that has a lot of weird meanings depending on how people structure things. And like, maybe somebody has a fork and they want to point theirs to the fork, and now the dependency isn't resolved, but it is right. And they're like, why isn't it right? There's a lot of those edge cases that starting to go down this rabbit hole open up. Whereas what people, I think, really want, as Jordan was describing, is this feature set that they don't want to get into those kind of details. They just want to say, this is what my package depends on. And I don't want to have the accidental thing of I deployed this to prod and it's missing the dep because it was somewhere else in the whole mono repo. Like, those are the kind of things that happen as soon as you start mixing all these ideas together in a real project, in a real world scenario. And it becomes really hard to debug. And so if we continue to add these features, I think we're risking going down that long-term path of making these things just unmaintainable. Even if they solve great, they might solve today's use case really well. And like, maybe there's some case for adding it and then intentionally adding it to deprecate, in a few majors. Like, but still, I think we just need to be aware that that's probably what we're doing.
So Isaac,
So
I'll let you rebuttal, and then I know Roy also has his hand up. So
yeah, I want to just kind of summarize as I understand it what Jordan is proposing, and then I'll yield the floor to others. So forget about hoisting. Let's not talk about implementation details. The bottom line is anything that is listed as a peer dep, we wish to be shared among all of the workspace projects, all the defined workspace
That
projects.
listed as a peer dep.
That list it as a peer dep.
Only
Everybody
the ones that listed as a peer dep.
Everybody who lists it as a peer dep gets the same instance.
Mm-hmm.
Second, anyone who lists any of the workspace projects that list another of the workspace projects as a dependency, peer dep, what have you, will get the one that's in the workspace, that's in the workspaces project. This is obviously a pretty big departure from the implementation that we have. It's a very big departure from the way that Lerna and Yarn 1 work. So that is a thing that I would love to see, like a write-up for, and like what are, like, staying away from implementation details, or like, we're going to use node modules for some, if it's the right implementation, if it gets us the right behavior. Like, let's not worry about what the implementation is though, and just write up like, how do I want this to work? Like, what are the constraints? What are the tests it needs to pass? And like, get that nailed down, explore those edge cases, and then we can implement something to that spec. The second thing though about like, is a symlink an instance of a Git repo? I can imagine some cases which are not workspace related that would have a similar kind of issue. And at the very least, we're being inefficient right now, right? If I have a Git submodule that does a checkout of, github.com/foo/bar, and I have something else that depends on github.com/foo/bar in one of my dependencies, and I'm actually depending on my submodule as a symlink, like, I'm going to end up checking it out twice, which feels unnecessary. Like, that feels like a separate thing to workspaces that we should fix anyway. And that's it.
Well, and maybe or maybe not, right? Because that sort of delves into larger issues about deduplication and
right. So it has its own edge cases.
The Tink PNPM model and so on. But that's a different thing.
Yeah, it has its own edge cases and it's deserving of its own RFC, but it is a much smaller problem and a much smaller change than, totally sort of flipping the apple cart on like how we do workspaces or what a workspace is. Roy, you're next.
Do you want to go? Yeah. You might be
yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, no, I wanted to just mention but then I was digging more when Jordan was speaking first. But basically, maybe just the possibility of, just doing that other model we discussed early on, Isaac, where we just like symlink everything into the node modules folder of each consumer of that workspace. But yeah, I just wanted to say that maybe it's not too late. I don't think it's too late at all. Like, we just landed the foundation work for workspaces, so I think we can definitely like rework, and the set of features we support right now is so small that I don't think is super disruptive if it's not a complete departure. Like, yeah. But it's basically what I wanted to bring on. Yeah.
So apologize.
so-
I've been taking notes. Jordan, did you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just saying, like, over the next month or two, I'm happy to help to like pair with Wes or Jonathan or whoever else is interested to try and write the RFC. I mean, my instinct is that it will either be something import maps like, or something where we make a workspace underscore modules folder or something at the root and link from there. Otherwise leveraging node modules. And one of those two, right? Yeah, or exactly node modules / dot workspaces, something like that. I feel like it shouldn't be too difficult to analyze those approaches categorically and then figure out which one is like easier to implement and also easier to maintain and also less disruptive to the ecosystem. It's totally reasonable to ask that be written out. And I wish that I had more time that I could do it in like a week, but yeah. But also anyone who wants to write it up sooner should feel free to do so and then just tap me for review.
We could actually, so just a suggestion there, like if that sounds like something we want to kick off and sort of have that collaboration, we could kick off that with like a new HackMD doc where people could like contribute to that async if you think that would be like an easy way to get that collaboration going, Jordan. So that's one option there. Apologize. Did anybody else have anything they want to add to this? I know that it's come up a few times, or Jordan's made the note a few times about the differences between the hoisting and then shared, like versus not shared dependencies sort of model and strategy. This is definitely a space that like I think we'll eventually have another RFC to point to in the near future, which we can collaborate on. From my perspective, that would be something like a strategy config or something like that, which would change like essentially how things get like reified on disk, or like even built. I know Isaac corrected me the other day on this. It's like what the ideal tree looks like, and then also how things are reified on disk. So I think there's an opportunity here to create a couple RFCs for this stuff. So so in particular though, for this, do we want to just keep it on the agenda, and then the action item is we'll see something more concrete come out in the next little while? I think there's some ideation that has to happen on how to solve for.
Can I ask
So
from?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to ask from your side, do you see, like, I'm worried about these things in the long term and what the user impact is, but from your side, if we started going down these solving for the edge cases in these, different spec types, is my concern real? Like in the long run, is that going to be a problem for maintaining, the workspaces implementation if we have that? Because otherwise, I think adding this as an incremental step, like if those concerns are sort of unfounded, I think adding this as an incremental step is probably really good. Although I still believe we need to fundamentally rethink the practice.
Yeah, so I think both RFCs are worth exploring and probably will result in some kind of change or improvement to the CLI. I think that there's like the small issue and the big issue, right? The small issue is, should a symlink to a git checkout be a satisfying resolution for a git dependency on that remote? And I have a hard time imagining like why it wouldn't be. It seems surprising to me in a way that it's not, even though I understand why it's not. That would solve kind of that does paper over the problem that Jonathan brought up here. But I also think the bigger RFC of like, let's really, draw much clearer sort of guidelines around like what is a workspace and what has access to which thing and how to predict that and so on. also would solve Jonathan's issue and potentially, is worth doing for a host of other reasons as well. So I think let's do both things. For the Git repo, Git symlink thing, I think I can probably take that on and write that RFC unless somebody else wants to take a swing at it.
That'd be great if I'll add that. You said, I'm going to add that as an action item.
Yeah, one more.
You said it. It's on the call now. It's
yeah, I know. You as soon
it's
as
in the
you
YouTube
say
video.
It's like
Can't get out of it now.
Go ahead, Roy.
No, yeah. One more thing about the original RFC I just opened here is also thinking about other different types of version specifiers, like even tags. Like they don't work right now. Like if you try to just depend on latest for a package, like the current workspace's implementation is not going to be able to match that.
Oh, because it only treats latest if it's a Semver resolution, right?
I don't really know what's going on, but
You have to look at our dep valid function to know.
Yeah, and I put a few examples to kind of try it out, and I found out that even like just using latest with like a brev, right, like wouldn't really match against it. So yeah. So I think, anyways, I just wanted to make sure when we discuss the entire workspace again, let's just make sure we have like this kind of matrix of all the different version specifiers we support, and just at the very least, document that we are not supporting these other ones if for some reason they're not supported.
Yeah, so tag and remote types will, so tag is treated as valid if it's if it has a if it has a resolved value and the resolved value type is remote, meaning it was fetched from a tarball. Since that's really all that we can do to say, well, you depended on latest and we got this from the registry, and presumably it was latest when we got it, so that must be valid. The other thing is if you depend on remote, we verify that it is the same URL was the one that we fetched it from. If it's Git, we check to see that the resolved value is a Git repo and that it's the same repo. And then there's kind of some other logic. So if you depend on a branch or a Semver, we test that as well. Anyway, bottom line, there's two good ideas here that we should explore.
Awesome. And so you've taken the action item to look through the first. Is that right?
Yeah, the small one.
Yeah, the small one. Okay. Cool. Did anybody else have anything on that? Jonathan, did you want to add anything other than you want to do this thing? Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I'm new to the RFC process, so I don't want to take lead just yet.
No. We love that you brought this, like, and it's mostly, these calls are about conversing through like the problem space, and then the artifact of a more formalized like RFC, and is kind of like the place where we can collaborate on like the actual definition and sort of spec, and then we go off and hopefully get some time and resources to actually go and implement that. So this is perfect, bringing this up. So appreciate you, proposing it or asking us why it's not not the way it is today. Cool. So if there's not anything more to speak on to that, maybe we can move on to the next item we had, which was added sort of last minute. That is PR number 198 in actually the Arborist repo, and I'll share that with folks so they know where it is. And this is a PR to introduce foreground scripts as an option. Isaac, did you want to maybe speak to this?
Yeah, it should be, I expect it's going to be somewhat uncontroversial. I just kind of wanted to bring it up in this forum. The idea is right now we push all like build scripts to the background. And this adds an option that we could be able to do npm install -- foreground - scripts. And then all the build scripts will not be pushed to the background. If you do have a handful of build scripts, it does make your install quite a bit slower because if they're not in the background, they're also not parallelized. And if you have like Node.js builds that are like flood a bunch of warnings and errors because of like C++ style junk, then you get all those same problems back. But there's been a handful of cases we've seen where folks are not sure that a script is running, and then they say, oh well, I updated npm and it's still not running the script, and we're like, yeah, no, it is, you just don't see it. So I think having that option to run with foreground scripts would at least help with debugging. And there's also been a couple requests to do that for CI environments where like, okay, adding 30 seconds to the install time is not actually a big deal. What I want is a log of the build. So yeah,
Jordan?
That's what this is for.
Yeah, I mean, this option seems fine, but maybe just by default, when a package runs a lifecycle script, instead of outputting nothing, we just output package foo is running a pre-install script. It exited with this script, and then ... and then it exited with this code or something. Like, so the purpose of suppressing the output was to hide like spam and stuff, right?
We do log it. It's logged at the, I want to say info or verbose level, because it is really noisy. Like if you have a lot of things that do a lot of build scripts, like in a normal install, you can get really flooded. And it does look like an error if we're logging it at
but
that
if it
kind of
collapses down to one line of output, or maybe two for each lifecycle script, isn't that useful to display by default? Because then people know that the scripts are happening.
I mean, yeah, we just
like, I realize that the full output is noisy, but like they're in npm6, they're used to seeing all that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, feedback and responses from the community seem to indicate that they're not used to seeing that, no matter how long it's been around. After 10 years, they're still alarmed by it. But I think okay. I mean, what you're suggesting is take this thing that's currently being logged as like verbose and bump up the log level. The only issue there would be like not wanting to make it look like it's an error. But like if the build fails, then you do see it in your debug log. Like it is being tracked now. On the initial npm 7 beta, it actually wasn't, and that led to all kinds of problems. So that's why we added that.
I mean, even sorry, just real quick, even a summary line at the end that was like, these packages, list ran, or whatever. It's just some sort of summary output that said these packages ran these install scripts and they worked. Like, would probably be sufficient. People are just, I think, looking for confirmation that their scripts are doing something. They don't care what it's doing. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah.
So just to add a little bit of color commentary to this, I have recently seen some security issues that got caught specifically because all of the log output was there, even if most people don't want it. So it's definitely like a double-sided issue here, right? There's some pros and cons. And I think Jordan's proposal actually adds some great value in that it gives just enough to know when you might want to go look a little bit deeper. As soon as you hide it all, you don't actually know that it's running anything, right? And a curl to a malicious server that happens in a post-install script kind of is nice to know. And like if you thought, oh man, that one looks new to me, that might be just enough to trigger the end user to go, oh, let me go look at the debug log and see what it actually did there, because I don't remember it running a post-install script. I actually don't, or like maybe I don't think it should be, and that's the indicator. So I'm a big +1 to adding something. I think I like the idea of like a list, or even like a dot kind of interactive thing until it's done running. I don't know, something that says that it was doing something.
What about here's one idea to kind of capture all of that, because we do capture it, right? We are piping it and saving it up as a string so that if it fails, we can dump it to the error log. It wouldn't be too hard to write all of these things to a file in your .npm folder, like last.npm/last install build scripts.txt, and it's just got all the commands and all the outputs. And if you want to go look at that, fine. If you don't, well, the next install will just be overwritten. So
that sounds useful for when you know that you need to debug. But I'm saying that unless something is shown by default to every single user,
so we could
they're not going to know to look there.
We could also say 57 build scripts were run. Here's the output if you want to look at it. It's in this file.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be too
probably
hard.
Be more useful to list which dependencies ran build scripts as well there. But yeah, that something like that would be fine for me. Just the idea, because especially in an app where you have 60 things, maybe you're cool with 59 of them, but you really want to see that 60th one ran, and you don't want to dig through a massive log file every time to audit it.
Sure. We could also put the list of what are the packages and what were the commands up at the top of the file, and then then the output.
Right,
there's ways to structure it so it's reasonable and also doesn't flood your
that makes auditing
terminal.
And debugging easier, but that doesn't make discovering the need for it easier. Only shoving that information in the user's face during the default install achieves that. Some information.
I disagree.
Specifically the case that I'm talking about was that the user recognized the package name as something that had previously had some security issues around it. And they went, that seems strange. I remember that package name from the last time. Let me go look. And if they had to go into a file otherwise, they probably wouldn't have done it. So that specifically putting the package name was in this very specific real world use case that saved us one time. So.
Personally, I'm all for better messaging and communicating to the end user, and I'm kind of in the boat more probably closer to Jordan in terms of consolidating. I think a perfect example is the output that we get for npm audit and npm fund, where it's a single log or a single line that essentially collapses that information and down to a single metric. So I'd rather see something like that than something super verbose in terms of the logging. And obviously we can do a better job in saying when scripts are running and who ran them as well. So I think there's an opportunity to clean up that experience for sure. I think this would probably align with some, UX and UI improvements we want to make, towards, I think the middle of the new year here, which might be helpful.
My main point is just that more is not always better, and is frequently worse.
It's not necessarily more. It's just a new indicator. Yes, that would be net new. But where I can see, there's probably a lot of value in just essentially seeing a collapsed single, even if it's a single line with a number of how many scripts were run. That's better than what we have today, which is nothing and or everything, right?
Well, so it's nothing or everything that's at the info level or verbose level, or with foreground scripts, everything. And also, hooray, your build is slower.
Right.
Foreground scripts would also make it possible for some scripts that do still insist on having an interactive install or post-install script.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that would be interesting is you could imagine that the indicator or the log message would be at 0 scripts run if you provided ignore scripts as a flag, right? So you would see, so that's just an indication that like truly it's like a sanity check for a lot of folks that would be doing something along those lines, right? And or if it would be potentially like a quality check for folks that are like, I just installed this thing in an environment and it ran like 1,000, you know, 1,000 different scripts. Like that would be a quick indicator, especially if they have, let's say, like a really stringent like log level defined. So like they're not seeing anything. I think there's something there for sure that we could do. And it wouldn't like add a lot, like us just like essentially counting how many scripts are being run is like pretty simple. Please don't make big builds. There's some chat. Okay. Don't make CI build slower. Yeah, agreed. So that was sort of like a side channel. Like there's potentially like an RFC there where we could say, like, I know somebody else has created an RFC before about collapsing. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was installed output. There was another one that was very similar to this.
Yeah, so I think a reasonable course of action here is we move forward with foreground scripts in Arborist and adding the flag in the CLI. The other bit of work there is to make Arborist count up how many scripts it runs, which is also pretty easy, or even like stash all the output somewhere, even if it doesn't error. Where right now, if it doesn't error, then we just throw it away because everything's fine. So if we're gonna, we could track that stuff on the Arborist object. It's just RAM. It's fine. We got plenty of that. And then we can talk more or have an RFC about like, how we want to message that stuff up at the CLI level. But getting the kind of the tools in place is pretty straightforward. And I think there's a lot of support for like, yeah, I would use that. So it's not a waste of time.
Cool. So if there's nothing else on that, did anybody else have any issues or any other RFCs they want to discuss? Going once, going twice. I will give you 15 minutes time back or 14 minutes time back then. And again, say Happy New Year to all the folks that have joined, and let everybody know that we're back here, and we'll be back here again next week, same time, same place. And hopefully encourage everybody to continue to contribute comments and feedback in the RFC's repo itself. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.